Going back to Chaplin, I know just from reading, you did a ton of preparation for that film. And I wonder if that preparation was fear-based or was it reverence because he was such a genius that you've been given this man to portray. How did all the preparation and all the work you did for that film kind of inform the rest of your career?
I mean, it was my first Iron Man experience where I went in and screen tested for something that there wasn't exactly, immediate faith that I could do it. So I like a challenge.
What was that screen test like?
It was like, well, first of all, I went in to meet Richard Attenborough, and he held up a picture of Tom Cruise and goes, "Now, isn't that a remarkable resemblance?" And I was like, what am I supposed to say? Yeah, you should give him the part.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Modern Times Podcast. I'm Nigel Driner, and we have...
Anne.
And Sarah.
All right. And it's good to have Anne back. She missed the last show. How was your vacation?
Oh, I went over to the other side of Florida, and it was really nice on the East Coast. So I was there for about a week. It's a lot different than my side of Florida on the West Coast.
Yeah, Florida is like its own country almost, because from where I'm at, it takes about 10 hours to get out of the state, period. So
oh yeah, definitely. And then northern Florida is so different than central and southern Florida.
Before we get into our subject today, let's briefly go over the last couple episodes. We had Ben Modell and we had Stephen Norman. We got a lot of positive comments on those shows. I know, Anne, you weren't here for the one with Ben, but we learned a lot we didn't know about how they shot silent films and the different speeds that they use to achieve certain effects. Yeah.
I learned a lot too.
And Ben has his own show, and you could tell he's really comfortable talking on a podcast show.
And after we recorded it, Ben invited me because I'm in school in Virginia, and he was playing a show at the Library of Congress Film Archives in Culpeper, Virginia, and I went with some friends, and it was a lot of fun.
That's right. Yeah, tell me about that a little bit.
There were two films. It was a double feature. One was a Colleen Moore movie called Broken Hearts of Broadway. Both of the movies were Broadway themed. Broken Hearts of Broadway. The second one was a Marion Davies movie called Lights of Old Broadway. And I preferred the Marion Davies film more, and it had this funny backstory of twins separated at birth, and Marion Davies plays the two twins. But it's so funny because it makes zero sense to the plot otherwise, and they really only focus on one of the twins. It was just like a gimmick to have her play two characters. And Ben was fantastic on the piano. He was going to play the organ, I believe, but like it wasn't like lifted onto the stage. It was like broken or something. So he played on the piano. Still very great. And I said this to him after the first film. I kept forgetting that it was a live accompaniment, and he said, "That's the point."
Yeah.
And two of my friends that came with me, who are college age, I'm so surprised that they joined me. One of them said, "I can't believe he memorized a whole hour of a movie score." And I said, "No, he didn't. He's making that up off the spot." Because after what he told us in our episode, I could explain to her that it was all improvisation, and he was only playing certain melodies he had memorized for specific moods, and she was just completely surprised by that. And it was wonderful, and the theater was really cool. It was like this old-fashioned looking theater with big red curtains for the screen and little stars on the ceiling and really nice seats in the rows. Very, very nice theater, which surprises me that it's out in Culpeper, Virginia, of all places, which it doesn't feel like a place in Virginia at all.
It's funny because we did the episode with Ben, not even knowing that he was going to be doing a show near you, almost like a couple of
Yeah,
days later.
it was like perfect timing. And if I hadn't found anyone to go with me, I wouldn't have gone by myself because it's about a 2-hour drive from where I am, and I would have gotten back 1 in the morning. So thankfully, I put out a message to my friends, even on my like college's website, like whoever wants to join me for a silent film double feature this Friday, let me know. And 2 of my friends said they wanted to go, which delighted me.
Great.
And I got to teach them a lot about silent movies on the way.
I was going to say, it's always fun to go with people that have never seen a movie like that, especially in the theater. What were their reactions to it as a first
They
timer?
really liked it. They didn't like the first film. They thought it moved kind of slow, not because of Ben, but because of the actual movie. The plot was kind of dry. But they really enjoyed the second movie, as did I. They didn't seem bored at all. Like for the whole experience, they thought it was really cool, which like made me really happy. I love it
when you're immersed in that environment in a theater like that, that's you almost feel like you're stepping into a time machine. So
exactly.
it's a lot more interesting than watching it on your TV at home when you're with an audience and in a vintage theater like that.
Of course, and it makes me even more happy because I can never find anyone my own age who is really interested in silent movies, and I was just glad they came and were actually interested in the experience.
Mm-hmm. That makes you feel like you did a good deed.
Yeah, they had a lot of fun.
Cool. Why don't we just jump right into the next topic for today? This is something that I've been really interested in jumping into, and the DVD of the I don't know what you call it, Attenborough Chaplin, Robert Downey Jr. Chaplin, the biopic. I call it many different things.
1991 film. 1990.
There's really no audio commentary. There's bonus features, but they're not that extensive.
No.
And I don't think anyone's really jumped into this film and discussed it as an extended piece. And that's something I always wished the Robert Downey Jr. film had on the DVD was a commentary track with Attenborough. And unfortunately, we're not going to get that now.
There are some interviews on YouTube. I sent you a link yesterday where Richard Attenborough talks about the movie, and in there is also David Robinson talking about the film, and you can just tell by the way he's talking that he kind of felt it was an immense undertaking. And the thing with Richard Attenborough, at the end of the interview, he really said that he wished that he could have done it over. The film that was released was not the vision that he had. I think it just was so immense, and it just got away from him.
In the end, it was more saturated than he wanted it to be.
Right, and that's why they had to include this fictional Anthony Perkins, right? No, not
Hopkins.
Anthony Perkins. Hopkins,
Anthony.
yes.
Although both of them would go on to play serial killers. That is a funny connection.
That's true. But they had to add him after the fact, so Charlie talking with him could kind of tie the movie together.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that part is completely fictional. Charlie had no editor but himself. As far as Charlie Chaplin, he edited his book on his own. But they had to have somebody to kind of tie up the loose ends and try to string these pieces together.
This man had a lifetime that would equal 3 or 4 normal people's lives.
Long, very eventful, many chapters.
Many chapters, many eras of his career, many scandals. It just goes on and on and on. And how do you condense a man's life story like that into even a 3-hour movie?
What I find interesting is that for his life, it's hard to pinpoint a villain, or an antagonist, and so they made J. Edgar Hoover the antagonist. But really,
and Sidney.
Yeah, and Sidney a little bit, but I think it's kind of conflicting because Chaplin could be his own antagonist, just building up his career, thinking of how how to make every movie perfect.
Yeah.
And pushing certain people away.
When I started my blog like almost 5 years ago, this is the part that interests me. I'm interested in the artist, of Chaplin the artist. I very seldom post anything about his personal life. And I also am really more interested in his time period of 1914 to just City Light. I do post about modern times and the great dictator and stuff, but I try to keep my focus more on that, where other people might do a blog about his personal life. And what I'm saying is, you can take certain parts of his life and expand on those.
Yeah.
There's no way you're going to be able to do his entire life, personal and professional, and give it justice. It's just
unless
if
it was
his life had ended 50 or 40 years before he actually passed away, it would have been a much shorter film, and they could have fit a lot more in it instead of doing his entire span of life.
You'd have to do like a mini series almost.
Yeah, a couple of movies. I don't know.
I know in the United Kingdom in the late 80s, they had, I believe it was a 6-part series, and it was about young Charlie Chaplin. And before he ever made it to film, it was about his life with his mother and his father. And actually, Twiggy played Hannah. But it was about his time on the stage and with Carno. And that's fine. I mean, you're just taking that one part of his life and you're doing a series. It's 6-part series.
Which in the biopic, his childhood goes by in the first 10 minutes of the film.
I found something interesting, though. Actually, Una Chaplin sold the rights to Charlie Chaplin's book. And she sold it a couple years before she died because she knew, from my understanding, that eventually it would go, if she didn't do something with it and renew the copyright or
it would go into
whatever.
The wrong.
Right. So she sold the rights to the story that Richard Attenborough got. But
let's get into, because these are two questions I had. Obviously, Attenborough was a huge Chaplin fan. If you go and watch A King in New York, it's really ironic. There's a shot where King Shadov is walking down the street, and he's going into the movie theater, and up on the marquee, there's a film starring Richard Attenborough playing at the cinema.
Yes.
I mean, that's just a really strange coincidence. And that's what, 1957?
Yeah, 1957.
What I wanted to ask Anne, especially, was in the late 80s, early 90s, was there like a Chaplin revival, resurgence of popularity? How did the time of 1991 become the year that a Charlie Chaplin biopic movie was made? Was there a demand?
No, not really. I mean, his revival was in the 70s.
Yeah.
Around the time that he came. You know, in 1970s was all things Chaplin. This seemed to be something that Richard Attenborough always wanted to do. And I think possibly because of Gandhi and what he had done with that film, he probably thought at the time that he could really do it.
And also with, as you said, Una selling the rights to the book, too.
Right.
It was just like a coincidence, yeah.
I don't know if it was always his intention to go into his personal life. I don't know where that came from. You know, if he just thought that was a good idea. That's what kind of, you know, surprises me, because he seems so. If you listen to interviews, he always seemed enamored of Charlie Chaplin's artistry. And then, you know,
do you think that was the studio getting involved and saying we need to have some more drama in this film, some more of the scandals, because that's what sells to an audience, not necessarily someone's drive and passion and the things they created?
Well, it's possible, because I know Robert Downey. I was watching an interview he gave, and he was talking about that time period, and he got the role, and Richard Attenborough had to keep calling him and telling him to hold on. Financing fell through. So from the time Robert Downey got the role, it was 9 months before he started shooting. So I think Richard Attenborough was trying to get financing, and that's possibly, you're right, that's They may have said, "Yeah, we'll finance it, but your vision is not going to, sell the movie."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now,
So that's why.
when production started, they had a hell of a time finding somebody to play Chaplin, which, I mean, admittedly is next to impossible. But Downey Jr., I guess, stormed into his office one day and just said, "I'm going to play Charlie Chaplin." At that time, I don't think he was that well known. I think he was a moderately successful actor. But would you say this was the film that really sent Robert Downey Jr. into the stratosphere of?
Yes,
I would think that, yeah.
but unfortunately, he was still battling drugs, and then he slipped during the 90s. But Hollywood, I think,
Kind
possibly
of
based on this movie, realized he really had talent, and they were willing to be patient with him while he, slowly recovered. And look at him now.
Yeah. Well,
top of
he's had a real turnaround with the Iron Man films.
Right.
and
And the
Avengers.
Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Which figures into a Chaplin-esque
Right.
vision, yeah, as well. This was Attenborough's baby that he wanted to get on the screen, not necessarily in a time where there was a demand for a Charlie Chaplin movie, and
No,
Right.
that says something because usually biopics and all these things come out when there's a certain revival or resurgence of that celebrity's popularity. And that was always something I wondered was, 1991 to me just seems like a dead zone as far as Charlie Chaplin stuff goes. And here comes
Yeah.
this
It was
grandiose biopic. How did it do in America when it came out? Well, or all over
did
the world, but it was initially released here.
right. It didn't do that great financially. All anybody ever seemed to talk about was, Robert Downey Jr. His performance is what saves the movie. And at that time, I think I've mentioned this in a previous podcast that they had to go around California to try to find 1910s California, and they were up somewhere in the desert, and it was possibly to shoot the scenes with Keystone. And they went into a general store, and the owner was like, "What are you guys doing?" And they said that they're making this film Chaplin, and the guy's like, "Why are you making a movie about this communist?" So there was still a lot of older people that still had that communist thing in their head. So it is strange that he would make it at the time. Charlie Chaplin wasn't really that popular. It was really before DVDs, the releases, production of his films, and the internet was an infant. So it is a strange time that he should do the film. But it did have a big Hollywood premiere. And the one thing I've often thought to myself, I mean, I'll be the first to admit I'm not a big Lita Gray fan and that whole fiasco, but she actually attended the premiere. And
did.
last night when I was watching the film, and his editor spoke about that time period and the fact that the book's 520 pages and she's only got like,
Five
3 or 4
lines.
sentences. And Robert Downey Jr., speaking as Charlie Chaplin, said, she was a bitch. She was a
Yeah.
flawed human being. And I'm thinking to myself, this woman, this 80-year-old woman or 84 at the time, is sitting in the theater all, decked out and, for her premiere, and she has to hear that. If that was me, I would be very humiliated to be mentioned in the film. And they show a couple of clips of the actress that played Lita Gray, but for that to be said. And see, Charlie Chaplin's, this is a part that bothers me. He doesn't call her a bitch in his autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't say she's a flawed human being.
He's pretty respectful to her in his book, just saying it didn't work out. I have children with her, and I don't want them to know what I'm thinking about her because
Right.
that's their mother. Which was really respectful in his autobiography, but didn't
That
illustrate
bothered
that in the movie.
That bothered me because I'm thinking, you got this, 84-year-old woman and she's watching yeah, that's where sometimes I'm thinking, where was Richard Attenborough's head? Because Charlie Chaplin never, you know, or maybe the way that Attenborough was conveying it is that he was saying it privately to this fictional editor.
That was the
I
point
don't know.
that I came across from it. Yeah, it would have been kind of interesting if Richard Attenborough had included the whole divorce proceedings with Lita Gray, but at the same time, I don't think I would have wanted to see that, because I think it should have focused more on him, on his art, than just his entire life, which is what Richard Attenborough ended up leaning towards.
The thing that bothers me the most, honestly, about this entire film is there's so much potential. They rebuilt the cabin from the gold rush. They built, I don't know if they rebuilt the facade of the outside of his studio.
Yes, they did. They rebuilt that.
Because it looks exactly the same. I wondered if that was the original, and they did some kind of photo editing work to make it look like it's 1920s Hollywood. But I also wondered if they just completely redid the outside of it.
Geraldine Chaplin said in an interview that I was listening to last night that she couldn't believe, because she remembered Chaplin Studios and they had redone it. That was, yeah, you're right, that they totally redid it, and
it was like the real deal to her. Yeah,
right.
Didn't Downey Jr. come out dressed as the Tramp for the first time?
Yes, he did.
And Geraldine was almost, in tears.
Like, that's my father, yeah.
I mean,
she felt like her father had come down from heaven, and that he really embodied her father.
And that says something, too. I mean, for as much as the film got wrong, they got him so right. Is there anything that you don't think?
Yeah,
Downey
he should have had blue contacts.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I want to make note of the film. I think it's called, like, The Cat's Meow, Peter Bogdanovich movie. What's his name? Eddie Izzard plays Charlie Chaplin in the film. It's about the whole Thomas Ince death on William Randolph Hearst's ship. Mm-hmm. And they play up the whole rumor that he was shot because of jealousy of Hearst, Chaplin, and was meant to be Chaplin, whatever. But Eddie Izzard plays Chaplin, and Eddie Izzard has naturally blue eyes, but he wears brown contacts in the movie.
Really?
And he does. And he said,
wow.
And they knew that Chaplin had blue eyes, but they said since everybody thought that Chaplin had brown eyes, they let him wear them, which I think is really interesting. And so they're playing up the fact that the public thinks that Chaplin had brown eyes, even though he really had blue eyes.
Nigel, I found some facts on how the movie did. It was filmed between October 91 and February of 92. So, I mean, you're talking, 5 months?
That's it? Wow.
Right. The budget was $31 million.
Whoa.
It says here it made 9 million pounds in the United States. So, what is that? 15 million. It made 1,800,000 in the United Kingdom.
So this was a flop then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I have a feeling it did better when it came out on video.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
For the people who really wanted to see it, yeah.
Yeah.
And it might have to do with an all-star cast, because literally just so many famous movie stars in it, like.
Well, even David Duchovny is in it before he was in X-Files. David Duchovny plays Raleigh, the cameraman.
Who else? Dan Aykroyd's in it. James Woods, Kevin Kline, just so many famous people. And I think having an all-star cast is a little off-putting. If it's just like a few, like 3 or 4 stars, and then the rest are like kind of unknowns, that's all right. But I don't like it when there's only famous.
Yeah.
Famous characters.
Well, you got Diane Lane, Dan Aykroyd, Kevin Kline, Marissa Tomei, Anthony Hopkins, Paul Rees, Mariah Kelly, Mila Jovovich, which I think
Right.
one of her
Jovovich.
real early roles.
That was one of her first films. She was 16.
So I'm guessing they used a body double in
Maybe.
certain
I don't know.
scenes then.
They would have had to have her parents on set
Yeah.
for that scene.
Oh, it's someone else we forgot. Geraldine Chaplin is in it.
Yes.
Oh,
Surprise,
yes, right.
surprise.
Obviously,
Right.
yeah. Her playing her grandmother. I do like that.
That gives it an air of authenticity, I think. That that lets you know that the family is on board with this telling of his life.
And the one thing that makes the film upsetting to me is the lack of Chaplin's relationship with Edna Purviance.
Oh,
They show like
yes.
2 scenes and that's it.
They don't even mention Mutual. If I recall, it goes. He talks about leaving Keystone, going to SNA, and then it just kind of blends into Mutual, and then it just kind of blends into United
First
Artists.
Well, yeah,
No.
they mentioned The Immigrant.
Yes.
Raleigh, they mentioned, who actually started with him. I mean, actually started working with Charlie at Mutual. And then they go off to 1918.
Wait, wasn't Raleigh with him at SNA?
They knew each other,
Oh.
but the first film that Raleigh Talbot ever did for Charlie Chaplin was The Floor Walker. And I believe at that time he was like there was somebody else doing the camera work. And I think it was a couple of films in where he took the helm. But
Raleigh wasn't at Keystone then.
no.
So
No, he
that's an
wasn't.
inaccuracy in the movie. Yeah.
Yes, just like using the Adventurer set
Yeah, and that's something else
for
too.
his first film.
Exactly. When the tramp is introduced in the film, what they're basically redoing is a recreation of The Adventurer, which came out in 1917, and they do a really good job of recreating that film. But that was 3 years after. That wasn't even at the same studio.
And 31 million is not a big budget. So that possibly might have played into why he had to condense so many events into one thing.
The thing is, it looks well made. Like, it's a Hollywood production. It doesn't look like a single camera movie with bad editing. It's a very well made movie.
And jumps through many, many, many generations of styles and trends. And I mean, this is a film that starts in the 1890s and goes all the way up to the 1970s within 2.5 hours.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Which is very impressive. You wouldn't think it would have such a low budget, especially with all those stars in the movie.
The music, too. I thought the music was very, very well done.
Oh, yes,
John
yes.
Barry's score is fantastic.
John Barry includes pieces he wrote for the film along with Chaplin written material.
Yes.
Like he works the song Smile into the motif of the movie's soundtrack. It works really well. Honestly, that really brought the film to another level, I thought, and gave it a real like fairy tale fantasy type of feel to it in a lot of scenes, I thought.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, the scene in Salt Lake City was very comedic, and it played off of Charlie dressing as a woman as he comes out of the hotel when they were editing the kid. That was comedic.
The part where he goes into the movie house and he's watching the comedy being projected up on the wall, like it was the time that clicked with him that he could be working in the films. He just stares up at that wall and that look on his face. Yeah, where he's mesmerized by this new technology.
And actually, I thought to myself, I wonder what 2 silent films that they're showing. One of them was with a ladder, and then the other one, it was at a gym, an old time gym. And I don't know why I thought to myself, I'm like, I wonder what those movies they're actually showing in that film.
That's a good idea. I never even thought of that before, honestly. I bet you there's somebody that knows that's in our Facebook group.
And it's interesting how he chose Butte, Montana, and it says 1913, but we all know that Charlie got the telegram in Philadelphia, but Charlie
and he left from Kansas City to get to California.
Right. But yes, I mean, with the trains, it really, it looks so much like, it would have been almost 100 years ago, or 100 years ago. With the steam trains that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what we like about the film. What they got right. I love the Academy Award sequence at the end.
I
Oh
do too. I
yes,
was about to say
yes,
one.
I thought that
and
was
it's
very good. And of course, the
hmm
makeup. He goes from playing Charlie at age, what, 19, Robert Downey
right.
Jr.,
18 or
to
19.
Charlie, in his 80s. And that's a testament to his abilities too.
Yeah, transformative abilities both with makeup and creating like the correct age, as well as Robert Downey Jr.'s acting, which is phenomenal in the movie.
I like the beginning of it. Like it really gives you a feel for how he lived as a young child, and it shows London, sooty and grimy, and it showed him in the workhouse, and it just gave you. I mean, you really felt bad for him.
Yeah,
The little bit of food that he had to eat,
The fish
and
heads.
right, and his mother trying to entertain them, which he mentions. And of course, the beginning of the film of how he came on stage, and his mother never performed again. But I mean, that part I felt like was really true. Like this is really how he got his start, and of course, having to take his mother to the asylum and commit her, and her saying that, and that's a very British thing, a very Irish thing. We tend to think a cup of tea is just going to make everything better. And when she's saying that to him, that has such a real feeling, and he does mention in his autobiography that she said that to him. And in fact, when she came out, when she got out of there, and then I remember Charlie was talking about she lived with him and Sid when they were with I think at the time they were with Carno, and she lived with them for a while. But she mentioned that again about the cup of tea, and that really made him, feel guilty. So I felt like he really touched on that, like you really got the feeling that this is how he didn't sugarcoat that part of his life.
They really show, especially in the early London scenes, kind of the influences that would affect Charlie later on. There's the guy who's walking with his feet
Y-
turned
Rummy
out,
Banks, right?
who almost has the shawl or whatever you want to call it from the Gold Rush on that he
yeah.
Right,
he wears. And then
And
there's the blind flower girl that walks
right.
by.
I noticed that last night, right? And now that whole scene in the restaurant with Hetty Kelly, he never spent any substantial amount of time with her. He never took her out um to dinner.
I feel like the
But
movie used more interaction with Hetty Kelly than the real Chaplin actually did. So
right.
Well, then of
Now,
course, getting the same actress to play Hetty
oh
as
my
well
god,
as
that's so cool.
Una really drives home the fact that Charlie was always looking for Hetty again, which
yeah, another Hetty. And
yeah,
yeah. In fact, Charlie Chaplin seems like, I remember reading in his autobiography, he was talking about Marie Doro, who was this beautiful actress, and she was in Sherlock Holmes with him, and she was in the silent era, but unfortunately, most of her films are lost. And she was like 7 years younger than him. He was 16, and he talks about the first time he saw her, and this is long before Hetty Kelly, and he was just like, "Oh my God, this girl is so beautiful," and he just goes on and on. And to me, I'm thinking that seemed to have more of an impact on him than when he met Hetty Kelly. Like I said, people have been trying to draw that comparison, and I just don't. I mean, I'm sure he had feelings for her. I think she might have been his first real crush, but the lipstick that he had Mildred use, and then, like you said, having the same actress, you know, who played Hetty, I thought that was
Mm,
um, a bit
stretching.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Carno, it was not the one to tell Charlie about Hetty Kelly. He
No.
did find out during that time period, but it was actually Hetty Kelly's brother, who Arthur, I think his Sonny was his nickname, and he actually came to work with Charlie and then United Artists. He's the one that mentioned that she had died 3 years before. But I mean, I think that it was used kind of well. The way that they used it showed you like how he was upset about it. But
Mhm.
I think that they just figured that they'd have Carno tell him.
Yeah.
You know.
It's also the fact that here he is, this big time star now, and he's world renowned, and he's coming back to England, and he just, I don't know, it feels like he thinks everything's going to be the same when he comes back, and it's not.
Right.
You know.
And I don't believe he was attacked in the bar.
No.
Like that they have that old guy throw a drink at him. And the last time I checked, I don't believe it snows in September in London because that's when he went to London. And there's a part where after Charlie leaves the bar and he's walking through London and this little boy comes up to him and you could see the banner for the kid
Yeah.
and it's snowing. And I'm like, okay, like that, wouldn't Richard Attenborough know that? That it doesn't snow, but I guess to give it a different feel.
Yeah. Yeah, those little, no matter what not everything's going to be perfect.
Right.
I really like when he's doing the drunk act in The Night in the English Music Hall or Mumming Birds.
Yes.
I thought they did a really, really good job of capturing that feeling.
That music hall feel, yeah.
As well as when he goes to Keystone, like his whole entrance into Keystone. I mean, I know it's fictionalized. He never actually walked into a shot like that, but I thought it was very creatively done, and it introduced all these characters in there and what they do in such a unique way without really saying a whole lot.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, like last night I was watching it, and the guy that's standing there, like when Charlie first comes upon them, the guy dressed as a Keystone Cops is actually Dan Kamen, and just the way that they did that thing with the cigarette. Charlie falls and he tries to light the cigarette, and he takes it out of Dan Kamen's mouth. I mean, it was funny, and it is true that when Max Sennett hired Charlie Chaplin, he didn't know that he was 24 years old. He thought he was an old man because that's how
he looked in the music hall show.
Right. Right.
Yeah, like I said, I always wonder if Sennett had realized that night that Charlie was 24, if he would have completely passed him, wouldn't have even taken him seriously.
He might have, because it seemed back then, in the early part of comedy, older men were the ones that were the stars. And
obviously
Sterling,
like women, yeah, damsels in distress.
And one guy that I've heard about, his name was John Bunny, and I think he died 1911, 1912. He was one of the first funny comedians in early film. And he was this old, heavyset, not very attractive guy, but it seemed like the older people are the ones that they paid the salaries to. So that probably is true, that he probably would not have hired him.
Mm-hmm.
That's fate stepping in and helping him out a little bit there.
Yeah.
Right.
The scene that I like is at the very, very beginning with him taking off the tramp makeup. I just think it's such a beautiful transition into the film with John Barry's music of the theme music.
Oh,
and it transitions, and it's the opening credits. That's what it is. And it transitions from black and white, and once all the makeup is off, it's in color. But it's very saturated, and I think it's just a very beautiful scene. It introduces the music, the tramp, and all the people who made the film, which I think it's wonderful.
Well, Anne, something you said earlier about how they focus too much on his personal life, that's kind of a catch-22 because so much of Chaplin's films are based on things that happened to him in real life or things he experienced. So it's a really difficult thing to do to keep those two things separate because so many real life things inspired the films that he would go on to make.
Well, yeah, I mean, his early life, yes. The scandal or the purported scandals, let's face it, he was a very nice looking man, and he had a boatload of money. So I don't know why people were shocked that he bedded down different women, and
Probably because of his screen persona. People think
I was about to say
of Charlie
they had
Chaplin the clown. They don't think of Charlie Chaplin the man, you know.
they had a certain expectation that that Chaplin and the Tramp were the same person, and that he had to live up to his image as a funny man, not too serious, and a flirt, but not anyone who would actually like get the girl.
I know when he purportedly met J. Edgar Hoover at in the film, he meets him at a party that they had to celebrate the end of
1919, yeah.
Right. Now,
J. Edgar Hoover was not in government at all at that time, which way too early that he should have been there. And he was younger than Charlie too.
The thing is that when Charlie's doing, the bread roll, and what Charlie said to him, because J. Edgar Hoover's talking about the film stars have a responsibility, just like they say today, how celebrities have a responsibility for how they behave because people look at it and they get influenced.
Role models, yeah.
Right. And he was talking about that scene where Charlie kicked the immigration guy up, in his butt. And Charlie pretty much says to J. Edgar Hoover, and I know that's how he felt. He said, people come to the movies, they don't make a lot of money, and they get a kick out of seeing rich people get the worst of it. And that was kind of Charlie Chaplin's philosophy in a lot of his films.
Oh yeah.
That was funny and I remember reading, he was talking about that scene in the Adventurer where the ice cream falls down Edna's mother's back. And that was funny because he ate it, it slipped down his pants, and then it dropped into her back. And it was funny. But he said, had he done that same thing to, he called her a scrub woman, had that happen and fallen down the shirt of a scrub woman, it wouldn't have been as funny because the woman, he said she has no dignity because of the position that she has as a scrub woman. You would feel sorry for her.
Yeah, because she would get crap all the time.
Right. So when he says that to J. Edgar Hoover in the film, that's really how he felt. He made films for those people. He made it for not the lowest level, but the common man. That's who he made his films for. So he wasn't, going to change that because, people got, and I don't, truthfully, I don't know, did anybody ever really get upset when he did that? When he kicked the immigration when he kicked the immigration guy in the butt?
I don't know. I feel like that could be a fiction because I think he had done that he had messed with police officers and all that, even in the Keystone film. So I don't know why that particular scene over the years has become so iconic. Maybe that's just something that over time evolved into something that's real, we take as controversial, but at the time wasn't necessarily the case. Maybe because he himself was an immigrant and
I think also because him not joining armed forces during World War I, maybe, but that was more towards him not enlisting, not really because of that one particular scene of the immigrant. And that movie came out in what year? It's 1970?
17.
Yeah. So the war was still going on, but Chaplin, obviously was selling war bonds with, promoting to sell war bonds with Fairbanks and Pickford. So I don't think that was a big problem, big issue.
He did more doing what he did in the war bonds tour and making films than if they'd thrown him out in the front lines.
Yeah, and he said that, and he is absolutely right. Yeah.
A couple things I wanna mention. I'm a big fan, obviously, of the Keystone, S&A, the real early days of his film career. This film is such a labor of love. You look at it, and there's a scene where Charlie's negotiating his contract with Senate, and he's dressed in his prehistoric past costume, which they don't even mention. They don't even say why he's dressed in that. So, if you aren't familiar with, so
that was accurate.
If you're not familiar with his Keystone career, you think, why is he dressed like a caveman? But because they don't even say anything about it. But they
Right.
just, and that's what I love. They just drop that in and just let you figure that out. You know what time period it is. Something else too is that Fatty Arbuckle supposed to be Arbuckle in
I
drag
think it is.
in
I
the
really
opening
think it is.
sequence?
Yes, I think it is. It's dressed as a
Yeah.
woman, and yeah, I do think it is. And I don't know if the groom was supposed to be Ford Sterling.
I don't know. I never thought about that until now.
Marissa Tomei looks nothing like Mabel Normand. They could have given her a darker wig or maybe did her eyes to look more doe-like.
She's in the film so little, it doesn't even really make a difference.
Yeah.
Right, right. And again, it's, they're insinuating that she wasn't a good director and that Mac was talking about her behind
Yeah.
his back. But of course, what they got right is the film, but they don't mention the name of the film, Mabel at the Wheel, but that's the film where he got into a big to-do about a hose trick,
Mm-hmm.
which does kind of, if you think about it now, you think, really? Like that one trick was tantamount to you like having a fit, but he knew what he liked, and that it
I think that was more or less at that point he had started to realize his importance in this game he was playing, and that's when he
right,
started to really stand his ground about directing and taking over and doing his own thing. I think the film, because in Mabel at the Wheel, if you look at those early Keystones, he starts by playing the Ford Sterling kind of knockoff character. Then he comes
right,
up with the Tramp. Then the Tramp starts to get really popular, and then Sennett has him go back and play the Ford Sterling kind of stock villain again. And to me that almost makes sense. He's like, well, here I am. I've created this character that people are liking, and now you're just gonna have me go back and do the making a living person again, the character again. So I can
right.
almost see how that would have been the time where he felt like he was taking a couple steps backwards and started to really say, okay, well, if we're going to continue to work together, then this is the way it's going to have to be. Because I think, isn't the very next Chaplin film after Mabel at the Wheel 20 Minutes of Love?
I think it was a couple of more like Caught in a Cabaret. Mabel Normand directed it, though many people thought that they directed it
Together.
together. But 20 Minutes of Love is very shortly after Mabel at the Wheel. And that part where Charlie's negotiating to direct his own films, at that point, Charlie Chaplin himself was not aware that New York wanted more Chaplin films. He didn't find that out until later. But Max Sennett was definitely kissing his butt. I don't know if Mabel wanted them fired or whatever, but Max Sennett knew at that moment that he couldn't let Charlie Chaplin go because New York wanted more Chaplin films.
Now, at this
And
time,
I guess
too, at the Keystone era, they never mentioned Charlie's name because Sennett liked to keep his actors. Wasn't Chaplin
right.
the first one where like they demanded to know who this person was and his name?
Yes, because it used to be the star was the film, the Keystones. They were the stars, not the actual actors. And it really wasn't until he went with Essanay that they started flooding his name immediately onto posters, and really that's where Essanay is the one that really started using Charlie, because if you look at some of the older Keystones where his name is on there, they called him Chaz,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess in England is we don't use it. If your name is Charles here, we call you Charlie, but I guess Chaz is a British nickname for Charles. One scene used to always mystify me. When Charlie shows up at Douglas Fairbanks' party, he's dressed as one of the Three Musketeers, or wait, who is Douglas Fairbanks supposed to be at his party where he's swashbuckling and he's, flying through the air? Is that he's supposed to be a pirate, right?
Well, he played Zorro, he played a pirate, he played the Three
Okay.
Musketeers. I think it's probably maybe a hybrid of all those things. The Thief of Baghdad, he was also.
In the film, he shows up, okay, and then Mary Pickford comes, and in the film, she's saying to Charlie, "Oh, Doug's a lovely person," and trying to act like Mary didn't really know, Doug that well. And then that's when he met Mildred Harris. But there's a part in the film where Edna Purviance's character is dancing with somebody, and she says, "Hi, Charlie." And the first few times I watched it, I'm like, why is he looking at her like so strange? Like he kept turning over and looking. And then all of a sudden, after I read his autobiography, I'm like, there must be a part in this film where they go on about how Charlie found out that Edna Purviance was seeing Thomas Meehan. This is towards the end of their relationship. And then it clicked in my head. That must be, Thomas Meehan at that party. And that's probably why Charlie was surprised that Edna was with him. But when you watch the film, you say to yourself, why is he looking at her like that? Like he actually looks like surprised, like, what is she doing here, with that guy?
Well, that's
So
something we could also get into.
The way it's edited.
Yeah, the editing. Something else we could get into, which I think we'll save for the next episode, are all the scenes that were removed from the film and the effect that those edits have on the finished product. Originally, what was the film supposed to be? About 4 hours long?
Yep.
Yeah, he shot about 4 hours and edited it down to 2 hours and 20 minutes, which is
120 or so.
Yeah. Well, it's like
right.
You can almost not fault Attenborough because the film that you're seeing isn't really his complete project.
I just really wish someday that deleted scenes will appear in new DVD releases of the film, because I would love to see those missing scenes, especially scenes with him as the tramp, because there really aren't that many in the movie.
I was disappointed by the quote-unquote 15th anniversary edition that they put out. I had assumed when that was released that was going to have all the missing scenes in it, and then it didn't. It didn't. It had a couple bonus features, but there was no commentary. There was no, and you see all these images of Charlie in A Dog's Life and Charlie in his outfit for The Cure, and all these things that you never ever see in the film.
Charlie dancing with Edna, and he's in some kind of Spanish, costume sort of, and she's in a dress. It just reminds me of I don't know. Like at first I thought, well, is this from Carmen? Is it, but there's a poster for it. So I'm like, why do they do that? Why do they cut scenes out and then there's posters for them? And it makes you wonder, like, how come I didn't see that in the film? Mm-hmm. Like you said, The Cure, you didn't see that, but there's pictures of it. So it was there at one point. Well,
as I said, I hope at some point something is put together, and even if the scenes aren't reinstated back into the film, honestly, I don't think it's ever going to happen now, because I always had a hope since when Attenborough was still around that it would happen, but now that he's gone, I just don't think anyone's going to take the time or effort to go back and do a director's cut of this film. I just don't think there's enough of a demand for it, unfortunately.
Do you think that somebody will ever take on this project again?
Yes, I do. That's actually a funny thing you mentioned that, because it's, in a way, it shouldn't be done again, because this is kind of a definitive biopic with all these stars, and Downey Jr. got it so right. But in another way, they could do it again, but I don't think anyone would tackle his entire life again unless it was done in like a miniseries format. I think they would focus on the making of one, maybe Modern Times or Dictator, or make a film based on a certain point or period in his life without actually going into the full life story again.
They could do a film,
another take.
Yeah, another take.
Yeah, another take, because even though I really enjoy the Attenborough film, I'd like to see a different angle presented instead of just like J. Edgar Hoover's the bad guy and Hetty Kelly was such a big part of his life, when in reality neither of those things are real.
The actor Paul Rees that plays Sidney, he was never against Charlie. He was never the villain. He always backed Charlie up with everything he wanted to do. And that's honestly, if I had to pick one thing that I really had a problem with in this film, it was that they sort of demonized Sydney.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. My understanding is Sydney was a lot more liberal than Charlie. Like he wasn't. That they make Sydney in the film look like he's just this, really tight ass,
Like
and he really
reserves,
wasn't
yeah.
like that, in real life.
Of course, there's the Mildred Harris situation where she fakes where they lead you to believe that she faked her pregnancy
The thing was, I didn't understand that for the longest time because I didn't really realize that she had faked a pregnancy because I knew that they had a baby together later, which they don't reference at all in
No.
that horror movie.
Right.
Really confused me. I'm like, but they did have a baby together. I mean, the child Norman, little mouse, passed away a few days after he was born, but still, they had a child together.
He was born actually like 9 months from the time that they got married.
Yeah.
So the thing is, though, back then, it's not like today you can go to the drugstore and find out when you're 3 weeks pregnant. Back then, most women would wait a couple of cycles, so when he got married to her, she said she was pregnant, so you would think she was at least a couple of months pregnant, and then, they got married, and she got pregnant really shortly after. And Mary that part really confused me, that Mary Pickford would be the one to tell him, oh, guess what? You were had.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very strange part that made no sense. Now, if they would have mentioned the fact that he lost his child and that really influenced the kid, that would be a wonderful thing to bring up. It really would show how he took complete tragedy and he made, that motivated him.
Definitely.
But
definitely. That's a major, major missed opportunity in that film.
Yeah,
but
maybe,
but maybe it was there and it got cut. So who knows?
Right. And maybe we'll find that out.
I loved Charlie and Douglas Fairbanks' relationship. I thought they got that really well.
Yes.
Good chemistry as a friendship. Yeah. I also liked his relationship with Paulette Goddard in the film. I think they worked well together with Diane Lane and Downey Jr.
The scene where him and Fairbanks are up by the Hollywood sign, and they're talking about the talkies and everything. It's just funny to me that Charlie and Douglas are like taking a leak on the Hollywood sign. I mean, there's symbolism there because it's almost like because the talkies are coming in and it's almost like the silent film actors' stance against the changing of the guard in Hollywood. I don't know if it was meant to be that way, but that's how I've always taken it.
That's fun. That's a good way to put it.
And you know what I didn't realize until a few times I watched the film? The scene where they're watching the immigrant?
Yeah.
I thought that was just a clip from the actual immigrant, but it's not. That's Robert Downey Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And Penelope Ann Miller, who played Edna Purviance. So I thought that was interesting because there's other times in the film where there's clips, and that's really Charlie Chaplin.
Like the City Lights scene. That's
right.
I was going to ask that. Yeah, can we get a list? Can we think of all the times where the real Chaplin is actually, outside of obviously the montage at the end, there's the City Lights scene. Outside of that, I can't think of anything else that actually used real film clips.
The Gold Rush scene where they're actually filming it.
The scene where they're editing the kid they show an actual scene from the kid.
But they don't show Charlie though, do they? They just show Jackie Coogan.
No, they show Chaplin when he's kicking Jackie away.
Oh, but but it's at a distance. That's right.
And
they never show a close up of him.
When they're doing the music for Modern Times, there's a close up of him in the machine.
That's right. You're right.
The Great Dictator is Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
Because they first show them filming it, and then they show like a clip of it, like them throwing like tomatoes at the screen.
And I don't remember hearing that people were throwing things. When the film came out,
the movie was popular.
It was very popular. It was one of his most financially successful films. Some people privately said, like, the end, the speech at the end was a bit much, but people weren't thinking him a communist at that point. That was
No, yeah.
1940.
Just think in 1940, people thinking that his speech at the end of Dictator was a bit, quote unquote, a bit much. But think about it now. Look, I mean, you go on
Right.
YouTube, look how
Correct.
many times people have made videos with that speech. Outside of, the tramp and that, I think
Right.
that's one of the most famous Chaplin moments. And it just
Yes.
shows how ahead of his time he was, that he was able to say those things. It's almost
Oh,
timeless now.
one scene that I love, I don't know if it ever happened, is when Charlie is at a party with Doug and Paulette was there, and there was a Nazi guy
Oh,
talking, and Charlie says, "Why do they invite these what do they call them? These fascist fucks to these parties?" And he didn't want to shake the guy's hand.
yeah.
And somebody that was among the party guests was saying, "Oh, don't mind him, he's a Jew." And I'm thinking to myself, could that have actually ever happened?
That was
That
confusing to me. Yeah, that
Yeah.
whole
I think
scene.
it could have happened, but I don't know.
Is that the fact that a lot of people at that time thought Charlie was a Jew? Like the misconceptions because of...
Yeah.
because he did not deny that. His coloring, outside of his costume, there's, a lot of Jewish people that look like that, the blue eyes and, the dark hair, certain parts of the world. Some, they say that some gypsies are Jewish, but he never denied it. But I don't know if that would have happened, that, in the party like that. But I guess they needed that scene to drive home the point of why he was going to do The Great Dictator, and also heavily emphasizing that Sidney was half Jewish. But now we know that they really don't know who Sidney Chaplin's real father was. So they thought it was this Jewish guy, last name of Hawks, I guess Sidney Hawks.
Well,
But that was heavily emphasized in the film.
Yeah.
one part about the film I really like is how it hammers in that once Charlie established himself and once he became world renowned as being this just comedian, he felt the need at some point to, especially when they're talking about the Great Depression, he's talking about how he said nothing yet about the Depression or the Nazis and all that stuff that started to rise in the 30s. And that scene where he's in bed with Paulette and he's just sitting by the fireplace and he's just, that to me was Chaplin the man. He's sitting there thinking, I have this voice and I have to do something or say something about all this.
And it's when Chaplin really becomes politically driven.
Yeah, because there's a scene before that where both of them are at a nightclub and they're coming out, and there's people standing in line in this, for the soup kitchen, and they were coming up, and all they wanted from him was an autograph.
Oh,
and
yes, that's a great scene. Yeah,
right, because it really, it kind of shows in his head like, oh my God, the Depression is just terrible, and
that also shows how even poor people love Chaplin so much they would rather have his autograph than money.
Oh yeah.
Right. And then that's where in the film he became obsessed with modern times. And supposedly that scene with him with the music, he supposedly was a madman at that point, doing the soundtrack to Modern Times. He had his name is Alfred Newman. Was he the guy that did the music? He walked out on him because he had enough, because he constantly wanted, more and more retakes with the music. So
Alfred Newman, wasn't he the composer at 20? I think he's the composer that did the 20th Century Fox theme. And I think his now I'm going to check on this. I'm going to edit it out if I'm wrong, but I think his son is Randy Newman, the singer.
I think his nephew, but Alfred Newman also did the music for City Lights. He conducted it, but David Raskin, who's in that that DVD Chaplin Life and Art,
yes,
and he talks about working with Charlie during Modern Times and doing the music, and how he was just so much perfection. And then Paulette keeps coming in, and they make it seem like he was working with the music for like years, because she
Yeah.
comes in and she's like, the Mary and Doug broke up, and then he keeps not taking the boys out on the boat, and
He was obsessive over his. That's how these
yes,
creative people are. They labor over this stuff, and like you said, after Charlie would finish a movie, he would go into like a comatose state.
right.
Like he wouldn't get out of bed for days and days and days, and that's just how people like that
and
are, and it's hard to function in a real life relationship when
and
you're a person like that.
so you can definitely see that when he went through that whole thing with SNA, and they won the rights to show that botched up Carmen, they said Charlie was so sick about it he took to his bed.
Hmm.
So I mean, you can see that actually happened, because yeah, he did obsess about his films.
When that representative from, I don't know, Vitaphone or whatever comes to Charlie's studio and is trying to get him to jump onto the talkie bandwagon,
Hmm.
his speech that he gives about how and why the tramp can't talk is
Right.
just brilliant. That's brilliant in
Yeah.
and of itself. You instantly, if the tramp starts speaking English, he's alienated 3/4 of the world.
And I'm sure as on a business side too, he thought about that too. I mean, he would make far less money on his films if he went to all talking. But at the core of it, yeah, he felt that if the tramp talks, then 9/10 of the world are not going to be able to understand him.
Or
And I,
identify with him, because they all, whatever your language was that you were speaking, you just assumed the tramp was one of you. If you lived in France, you imagine him speaking French,
Yeah,
no
he's
matter where
very
you went.
valuable. Yeah.
It was never really brought up, but that's just, people identify with Charlie so much, they just assumed that he was one of them, no matter
and I,
where they were in the world.
I often wonder though, when people actually seen Modern Times for the first time, I wonder if people were surprised at the sound of his voice. You
I'm
couldn't
sure.
understand him because it's gibberish, but you look at him and you don't expect that voice to come out of him.
No, that's what I've always heard too. Everyone that's always heard his voice said that's not at all what they expected for him to sound like. My mom said the same thing.
Oh, did she? Oh,
Hmm.
okay, yeah. You know,
But the funny thing is, I don't really know what voice I expected to come out of the tramp. It wasn't necessarily that, but I don't know if I could be able to tell you what I expected either, if that makes sense. The tramp is so rooted in silent film, it's like
right.
unnatural to see him speaking.
And I often wonder if that was part of the problem with silent artists going over to talking. It might not necessarily be that their voice was high pitched or whatever. I think it might have been a disconnect. Like the sound, their own voice just didn't match their persona that they had created on the silent screen, and that might have been too difficult to transition over. Because some of them did try, Mary Pickford tried, and Clara Bow tried, and they just never had, the same success. But
Yeah.
Charlie much
Claire
more,
Bow,
because
people
he
like
did
Claire.
everything with movement. It wasn't a lot of intertitle cards. So yeah, I could see where he would be really concerned about the talking part. But they don't even really.
It's something that we've gone over things that we really like about it, and I'm sure we'll get back to, we'll think of more as we go on. But something that always really is jarring to me is how much time they take talking about his career up until about the Modern Times dictator era, and then from there it just rushes, it just shoots through the 40s and 50s into almost the Academy Awards part in 1972.
They only
They don't even
mention.
mention Verdú, A King in New York. They briefly mention Limelight. They show
Right.
him like coming to the premiere of Limelight, but and that's funny to me because that's a part of his life that is still so, I want to say, underappreciated. It's not looked at as much as the other part. And
Right.
that
After The Great Dictator, you're right. A lot of people don't focus on that part. And definitely after Limelight, it's almost like it didn't even happen. a king in New York and a countess from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, those films aren't really that. Well, Limelight is. But, I mean, you could easily. We're Chaplin nerds, so we love every bit of it, but you could easily erase, in his life story, you could erase Verdu, you could erase
Right.
Countess, you
Yeah.
could honestly erase The King in New York, and it wouldn't really make that big of a difference on his legacy. It's interesting to me. I would have liked to see more
But
of,
you know what's
especially Limelight, especially the Buster Keaton
right?
connection. They could have redone that scene and him talking to Buster Keaton about how Buster really fell on hard times and how lucky Chaplin was that he had all his finances in order, because it kind of juxtaposes how Charlie could have ended up if he had not worked as hard as he did to save his money and
Right.
to stay relevant. Because Buster Keaton was almost, I mean, rivaled Chaplin in the 20s, and
Hmm.
then, I mean, you see how far Buster fell.
But that's because he gave what Charlie held most sacred to his heart. Buster gave control over.
Yeah, and the studios completely just screwed him
Right.
over.
Charlie held on to his control, and that was
And United Artist was a great example of that.
right. Now it's interesting. In the film, the editor is going. He has a piece of paper, and he's marking off things, a list of what he wants to talk to Charlie about regarding the book. And actually, towards the end of the list, I happened to glance at it last night. It says Monsieur Verdu.
Hmm.
I was like, oh wow, I never noticed that. But there's a part in the film where Sidney is looking for Charlie, and it's around the Joan Barry paternity case. So that would have been around the time of Monsieur Verdu. And Sidney goes to the studio, and they said, oh, he's filming. But then he just comes out in regular clothes. So I was like, oh, maybe he was shooting Verdu, and I just never noticed the costume.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only mention in the entire film, and you just have to look for it. And the only reason I notice it because it's on my big screen TV. If I'm just watching it on the computer, I wouldn't notice that.
Yeah.
But there's no mention of that film at all. There's no mention of the Mann Act trial, which that's the one that J. Edgar Hoover wanted to take him down. There's no mention of that. They just go on about the Joan Barry case.
And that's a part of Chaplin's life I don't like to think about. It just
Right.
makes me upset. And because I hate to imagine how horrible that experience must have been. Especially since they found out it wasn't even his child and that a paternity test didn't matter with the evidence presented.
Right.
That's insane.
At the time.
All of that stuff was just such bad timing for him too, because I mean, let's be real, he wasn't a perfect person. There were a lot of scandals that had come before that.
Yeah.
So I think the public just assumed, not only was Charlie's, political motives in the 40s very questionable as far as America was concerned. Then you have this whole scandal with this young girl, and it was bad timing for him. And Verdu comes out, which as much as I like the film, I don't think that was the film that Charlie needed to make in 1947, because it didn't do anything to help his image at that time. It was almost like he was trying to piss people off with that film.
Oh yes, definitely. And it's funny. I've been listening to our earlier podcast, and I happened to listen to the one where we talked about Chaplin events. And when Sarah was talking about going to see the play, the musical Chaplin, and how in that Hedda Hopper was his antagonist.
Yes.
And really, she is the one that was relentless in what she printed in the newspapers. She hated Charlie Chaplin, and she was relentless.
In the musical, the whole thing about her hating Chaplin was because he would never go on her radio show to do an interview. So it was just really petty, but yeah, I don't know how it must have been for her in real life.
Well,
but
I think that Charlie, it might have been a more loyalty thing, because Luella Parsons was Hedda Hopper's rival. Yeah. And Charlie knew Luella Parsons. He met her when he went to S&A. She was a scriptwriter who wanted to give him a script, but that wasn't happening. Now, Luella Parson purportedly was on the boat the night that Thomas Inc. was dead, killed or whatever. So he might have had a loyalty to her. So that might have been one of the reasons that he didn't, do her show. But she was relentless, and I think, truthfully, more than what's his name, J. Edgar Hoover, I think she played a big thing into it because she was relentless, writing things up about him, and it's just.
Now, wasn't Charlie supposed to show up at the House of Un-American Activities, that whole thing that they did that Walt Disney was at?
He never went, yeah.
He was called, and he was going to go. He said he was going to be there, and then at the last minute he bailed out. Is that what happened?
Right. Because
which is why he's barred out of the country, yeah.
A rumor went around that when he showed up, he was going to show up in his tramp costume and make a fool out of them.
Oh my God! How incredible! How incredible would that have been?
He shows that kind of moxie in A King in New York, because remember how he gets called, he's got his finger stuck in the fire hose.
That's right.
And he goes there in front of these men, and he's hosing them down, and he made a complete joke out of the proceedings. So possibly they were afraid that he was going to show up, and it's not like you can tell him, oh, you can't show up as the tramp, because actually at that time, 1947, he's had grown a mustache for Monsieur Verdoux. So I guess they didn't want him going on there and making a fool out of them.
Going back to some of the actors in this film, Anthony Hopkins, this is around the same time he was playing Hannibal Lecter. Silence of the Lambs came out in 91, and I think Chaplin came out in 92. So I'm not sure around this time. It's just funny to me that the two completely weird roles he's playing almost at the same time.
He might have done it as a favor to Attenborough. They're both British. That's maybe why he did it. And actually,
I'm sure Hopkins has a deep appreciation for Chaplin. I'm sure he's a big fan.
And actually,
yes.
I never realized that Richard Attenborough was really, was also an actor. And I happened to watch this movie, Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, with Kate Blanchett. It's about the first Queen Elizabeth. And he's in that film as her advisor, and he's very good. I mean, I really got a new appreciation for him. He's a very good good actor. And I don't know, maybe it's because he's passed away, and you tend to not want to say brutal things about people that have passed. But I do know that he really admired Charlie Chaplin immensely, and he really tried to do the best he could. But I think he didn't have enough money. And it was a major undertaking, and he might have just got to a point where he didn't know which end is up. And
yeah, well, Attenborough after this would go on to be in Jurassic Park. So I wonder if it was during the production of this film that he got the word he was going to play John Hammond, which is honestly what he's going to be known for forever.
And Attenborough was asked to play one of the characters in the movie Hook, with Robin Williams in it, but he was working on Chaplin at the time, so he turned the role down.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
He was going to play one of the grown Lost Boys who left Neverland. He was going to play the older version of him, but since Attenborough was working on Chaplin, he turned it down and it was given to somebody else.
I'm going through the film while we're talking. I'm just kind of jumping around on the DVD. And when Charlie and Una are at the premiere for Limelight, they're kind of walking into the theater.
Yep.
Before Charlie and Una walk in, there's a shot. It looks like Clark Gable and Joan Crawford are walking in together.
Huh.
Yeah, it does. It does. And the scene where he goes to the restaurant with Diane Lane, Paulette Goddard, there's an actress that says hello to him, and just the way her mannerism is, I think it's Betty Davis. She's sitting there at the table and says hello, Charlie, and she's smoking a cigarette, and I was like, wow, and that looks like it could have been Betty Davis.
I'm amazed too how well they made Downey Jr. look as Charlie in the Limelight era. He looks just like him in 1952. I mean, and then what I love is they even have a guy dressed up as Carvello, with the tramp makeup on and everything in line, as Charlie and Una are walking through. So it's like they went to all this work to do all this talking about Limelight, and then they just gloss right over it, and it's on to the next thing.
There's a lot of glossing over.
Yeah.
Very important eras, so.
You know, Robert Downey Jr. went through so much to try and perfect the Tramp, watched all of his movies, and was coached, and to have all of that effort and not show it on the screen, it's
disappointing.
That's right, you know.
Well, maybe we can start change.org. You can start a petition to get a director's cut of this film. Because honestly, I mean, it is fantastic. It is a really excellent film, I think, especially if you're not familiar with Chaplin. It's a really good introduction to his entire life. You know, certain things aren't perfect, but as far as biopics go, there are a lot less accurate ones. I mean, the Jolson story, it's like 50% fiction.
Yep.
Oh, wow, really?
Well, the thing is, too, biopics, movies made about people's lives in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, over-glamorized
they do
the good aspects and downplayed the bad things. And I feel like starting in the 80s and, probably the 70s, biopics made about people focus more on the trouble and on the negative aspects more than the positive things that they did. It's funny how times have changed, and people now would rather hear about the bad things versus the good things. You know, it was very glossed over in a good way. And
well, I know that Buster Keaton, there was a film made about his life by, was it Dennis O'Day that played him? It was done in the 50s, and he really wasn't happy with it, with the film. But it didn't talk about the personal problems that Buster Keaton had. It was more about his, you know, his entertaining part of his life, but he didn't seem very happy about it. So, like you said, that they tended to glamorize people's lives. And you know what's true? Even in books, like if you read Charlie Chaplin biographies through the years, they didn't really, well, the thing is, a lot of people didn't know a lot about him. You know, the stuff that David Robinson unearthed. I guess people were just working with what they knew at the time and just try not to make it maybe more uplifting or, you know, like a Hollywood story.
Mm-hmm.
One biopic that I know about Cole Porter that came out in like the 30s or the 40s, played by Cary Grant of all people.
Wow.
And it's super weird because they do lots of like his troubles and like lots of failures. And Cary Grant is not the right person to play Cole Porter. Like, not an ideal choice. And there was lots of stuff they didn't highlight, which kind of bothered me. And also, since it's an older film, they can't talk about the real truth that Cole Porter was probably gay.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously they can put that in a 1940s movie, because that was especially a Hollywood movie, because no one would have accepted that at that time.
James Whale, too, the director that did Frankenstein, that film Gods and Monsters. That's you know, he was gay too, and you know, when you go back and watch Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, you get that sense of that little cheeky kind of quality that honestly I wouldn't have even ever picked up on unless I knew his backstory more. Now that I know his backstory, I understand the little moments in those films that hint towards those things.
Yeah.
It says here that at one point Jim Carrey tried out for the role of Chaplin to play Charlie Chaplin.
He just is too tall, number one. There's no way he could pull that off. Even Downey Jr. was too tall to play him, honestly, but I don't know. He wasn't too much taller than him, but
he looks like him at least.
Oh, yeah.
That's what Geraldine Chaplin said, is that he didn't so much, you know, his body type wasn't like her father, but he embodied his spirit. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So you didn't focus on that. The fact that he wasn't as, you know, short or slight. Charlie Chaplin was very slight,
Yeah.
especially in his early years.
Yeah.
But it's just how he
Carried
conveyed,
himself.
right.
It was very possible for them to film him at angles that would make him look smaller too. Actually, let's talk about for a second Charlie's mother, and obviously she's played by Geraldine, which is really cool. But the scene where Charlie sees his mom for the first time in a while, when she comes out of the institution, and they're sitting in the house, and she's just playing with the crackers. I mean, that's just a heartbreaking
Oh, it
scene.
makes
You
me
know,
so sad.
with all of his fame and his money and his success, at that scene, he's right back where he was when he was a child.
Yeah.
He's instantly transported back to all that trouble. So he never escaped it. It was always there. And do they mention really his mother's death at all?
Not. They just say
They-
she died or something like that.
Yeah,
but-
that she lived in a little house by the sea, and there was a couple there to take care of her, but they don't talk about when she died. But the thing is that a lot of times, like, what, Thanksgiving, how many of us have gone to a Thanksgiving dinner with the family? You say to yourself, all right, I know what to expect, I'm going to be above it. But then you get in with your family and then things start coming up,
Yeah.
And that was the thing. It's like he couldn't, I think that's why he didn't like to see his mother. I think that he may have been afraid that he himself, and he actually does exhibit throughout his life that he probably had some mental health issues, and possibly working on his films really, helped him. But maybe he was afraid to be around her. She might have reminded him of what his life was. He might have been afraid that, that he would turn out like her. And he might have actually even thought like she could have controlled it. Like sometimes people blame people that are sick
Yeah.
and think like, well, like
Um,
if somebody's depressed, like get over it.
They mentioned Charlie's dad really briefly. I remember
They don't show him either.
he says something like, talk about your father, and he says, I don't know much about him. I know he died of alcoholism. I
Right.
know that he sang on the stage. That's really all I know. Because Hopkins' character is like, you really don't mention your dad. Why don't we go into a little more about him? And he said, I don't know any more really about him.
But the truth is, he does mention his father in his autobiography.
He
He
does.
mentions living with him and Louise, his wife, girlfriend, whatever she was, and the child, and what a bitch Louise was, and how mean she was to Sidney, and she kicked him out in the street, and his father is the one that got him involved with the 8 Lancashire lads.
Yep.
And then of course the last time he saw his father, when he was in that bar, and he was sick with alcoholism. So he does talk about his father.
And that one point when he does see his father in the bar, that was like the only time they like had a father-son moment. Otherwise, that was it.
Now,
Right.
you mentioned Lita Gray being in the audience when the film premiered. Just
Right.
think about Una.
She-
Una had to have been there.
No, Una died a month before the film started.
Oh,
She died in
I didn't know
September. Yeah, she died in September of 1991, and the film. Now she knew that the film was going to be made, and she
Yeah.
gave it her blessing, but she wasn't alive when it started filming, so she never got to see.
that. So she saw
the
none of
film.
it. She never saw anything from it.
She met
No.
Robert Downey Jr.,
Right.
but she didn't get to see the finished product.
Wow. Because I mean, she plays such a huge role at the end of the film.
Yeah.
I would have
And
loved
she
to have seen.
It portrays her in such a positive light.
Yeah. I would have loved to have seen her reaction to that. I mean, imagine being her and watching the Academy Awards sequence at the end. I mean, that's something that she lived through, and just to see that on the screen would have been just an emotional roller coaster of feelings.
Mhm.
And what's strange is that a lot of people, I call them haters, but they're always like Charlie Chaplin, always took credit for everything. He didn't share credit with other people, blah, blah, blah. But yet, when it came to Una, I mean, at the Academy Awards, he actually brought her on stage and kind of pointed to her. Like she was such a big influence in his life, you know. And I just thought to myself, you know, a lot of people have always said that, you know, he didn't give credit where credit was due.
Well, she was a very loyal person.
I'm reading here on IMDb, and a lot of times they're pretty reliable, but what they're saying is originally the film was going to be distributed by Universal, who actually distributed A Countess from Hong Kong. That's not a Charlie Chaplin film. That's why it's never in any of the box sets. But the studio wanted a bigger name in the starring role than Robert Downey. They wanted Dustin Hoffman or Billy Crystal. What? And Richard Attenborough refused to comply. The movie was then put into, it says, a turnaround, and a new producer had to be found. And Mario Kasser, who is the producer, agreed to take the reign, but he wanted part of the film to include Charlie's life in Switzerland. So when they did that, because the film, that's actually Charlie Chaplin's
real home.
In there, and that's when they came up with the idea for Anthony Hopkins, so that they can use that part of his life in Switzerland.
It works. It works.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you think too, the only other person at this time that could have possibly played Charlie would have been Johnny Depp, I feel. And I don't even think he, you know, I think he's way too tall. Downey Jr. obviously was the best choice, but I think he would have done a good job too in 91, 92. This is around the time he was doing Edward Scissorhands.
Yep.
So he would have definitely done it well.
Benny and June soon after.
Certainly. I'm looking here at the end credits of the film where they're showing everyone in the film and they're kind of giving you what happened to them afterwards. And I know there's a couple inaccuracies there.
Yeah, like obviously Mabel, as we talked about with Stevie Normand.
It says Sidney died on Charlie's 76th birthday.
Right.
Yeah.
77th.
And there's a glaring thing about Mabel Normand, and we discussed that in our podcast with Stephen, where it says she didn't work after 1922 because she was involved in a scandal. But that's mentioned in the end of the Chaplin film.
Yeah.
It says Hetty Kelly was the inspiration for many of Charlie's screen heroines.
No. That's Richard Attenborough must have had that in his head somewhere.
I don't know where he got that from.
I've heard that along the way where people think because he liked a certain type of woman, dark hair and, you know, young and whatever. But what about Edna Purviance?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He was with her for 8 years, and she was really his first real adult relationship. And
that's really glossed over.
But she looks nothing like Hetty Kelly. She's the exact opposite.
And they never mention Woman of Paris, I don't think, ever.
No.
That's something I just didn't even think about till now. That's not even, at least The King in New York, or at least Limelight kind of gets a nod, and Verdu kind of gets a nod somewhere in the film, but Woman of Paris, that doesn't even exist in this movie.
No.
And that's interesting, too, because that was like his first failure.
Yeah.
That would have been interesting to talk about that, how he kind of had to go back to the Tramp and do the Gold Rush because he tried something different and just the public wouldn't accept it. But I mean, I said, this film could be 6 hours long and still not cover everything that he did.
Yeah.
So
he has a long life with a ton of different projects.
And there was one cringeworthy statement made in the film where, again, the editor, it mentions to Charlie, you know, that he had a propensity to bed babies. And I'm thinking, oh, God, why would they include this line in the film?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was a little cringeworthy.
It was a different time, too. That was more accepted then than it is now.
Yeah, in the 1950s, most wives were not even 20 years old. So.
Right.
It says, at the end, it says, Mildred Harris was Charlie's first wife. Her acting career faded after the divorce. Reduced to working in sleazy night spots, she died an alcoholic at 43.
Yeah.
Look,
what was she, like a stripper?
She was a singer in these dives. And actually, I believe Lita Gray when she was doing her stint in the mid-30s, she was going around singing as Mrs. Charlie Chaplin, and she tried to she saw Mildred Harris and tried to have a conversation with her, but Mildred Harris really wasn't interested in that.
That must have bothered Charlie that his ex-wives went around using his name.
Yeah.
That probably really, really bothered him. I mean, it is what it is, but using his name like that, and especially the kind of garbage films that they were in, were using the Chaplin name.
Mildred Harris, the divorce settlement said she couldn't do that. After she was divorced, she was billed as Mildred Harris. Lita Gray, there was nothing put in the divorce, so she was always known as Lita Gray Chaplin, even though she was married 3 times after. But after the divorce, she went on these vaudeville tours singing as Mrs. Charlie Chaplin, and she went all over Europe, and she ended up with a drinking problem, and Mildred ended up with a drinking problem.
I think the film did a really good job. We really didn't talk about Paulette all that much. Diane Lane's portrayal of Paulette Goddard. Honestly, out of all of his wives, I think they did the best portrayal of her, as far as she was so much different from the other girls he was with. She was more on his level than anyone else was.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And of course, it shows her as being blonde at the beginning, and how she says
the Harlow
look at the time, the Jean Harlow look. So
yeah,
Charlie recognized that immediately and just said how she needed to go back to being a brunette, because that's what he kind of went towards anyway.
And it's funny, I myself thought when she said to him, I was born a natural blonde, I thought he was trying to say that, yes, Paulette Goddard was a natural blonde, but watching it again, I think it was tongue-in-cheek, the way she's saying it, because most women that have blonde hair, and 90% of them are not natural blondes, they will try and tell you different. So it was kind of tongue-in-cheek that,
Well, she also made fun of his height too, because she says he says something like, "Oh, you'd look fantastic if you were a brunette.
6 inches taller, he'd be devastating."
Yeah. Something else too. The soundtrack album for Chaplin came out, as well as a single with Robert Downey Jr. singing "Smile," which actually was, I think, pretty popular when it came out.
And I've heard it. I don't like it very much. I don't think it's a very good version of the song.
It's just interesting to me that Downey Jr. himself is the one singing it.
Yeah.
That's a real nice combination of the film mixed with, because they could have had anybody come in and sing that, but they had him do it, which I thought was cool.
I mean, it does have wonderful music, and it really touches on certain scenes. It's very poignant. They did a wonderful job with the soundtrack.
Definitely. I own the soundtrack on CD. I think there's a record of it out too that came out in another part of the world. I think it is on vinyl as well. So.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, they were still making LPs in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there are many people that have come to know Chaplin from watching this film. So it does serve its purpose. And if you knew nothing about Charlie Chaplin, it's a very entertaining film. But like you say, we're Chaplin nerds, so we're like picking like, oh, no, that didn't happen. What the hell? And,
But it could have been a lot worse. That's how I feel. The things they got right, they got so right.
Right. Yeah.
So I can kind of overlook some of the omissions at the same time.
One of the things I want to mention with the film, whenever I watch it with someone, I have to explain a lot that's happening, because the film is made for people who know about Chaplin. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to follow.
Yeah.
Because it covers so many different time periods. I mean, his entire life, basically.
Yeah.
From the time he's 4, from 1894 to 1972.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, and Robert Downey, I mean, I think they said he had to sit in makeup for 6 hours to become the old Charlie Chaplin.
I believe it.
But he did a wonderful job. He got a BAFTA, which is a British Academy Award. He was nominated for an Academy Award, but I don't know who they gave it to in
They
1992.
gave it to Al Pacino that year.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Kind of a woman.
Yeah. So, and I know when he went to the Academy Awards, Geraldine Chaplin actually is, was his escort. He stayed in touch with Richard Attenborough, who became a sir, and then when he died, before he died, he was the Queen named him a lord, but they always had a nice relationship. And Robert Downey Jr. feels that Richard Attenborough is really the one that gave him his start in Hollywood. He really got him noticed.
Yes.
But
And it's funny that you mentioned you were talking about how Attenborough said he'd like to do the whole thing over again. You could take that so many different ways.
But in the interview, it's almost a touch of sadness, that it really, the vision he had didn't come out what he wanted, and that he wished that he could do it again. Like he knew there was flaws in it.
Yeah.
It's just, I think he didn't have enough money. And it sounds like the money he had, a lot of it went to salaries, because like Sarah said, these are all big name Oscar nominated people that are in these films, and they don't come cheap.
No.
And the different sets, I mean, some of it was filmed in London. They reconstructed Chaplin Studios. I mean, they had to find a place in California that would look like 1914 California when Charlie first showed up. And
I mean, they were making a period piece of the 1910s, the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and, well, not so much the 60s, it kind of rushes through that, but
right.
You're making a period piece where you have to get new costumes, new landscapes, new period cars.
Yeah.
That's not cheap either.
Well, yeah, and you know what? Because there's a scene that it shows the night of the Academy Awards where Charlie is going in front of Chaplin Studios. A&E, Jerry Moss and Herb Albert actually wanted to give him a reception there, but he couldn't do it. It was, still probably too painful. But it shows the limousine pulling up in front of it, and there's these cars going by, and they're all well, I don't know. To me personally, they actually look like they were more 1960s, early 1960s with the tail fins.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be 1970s cars. So they had to film that. I mean, yeah, there was a lot of filming, and it really didn't make the money back.
That's why, because, it's like at that time there really wasn't a demand for a Charlie Chaplin movie.
If they wanted to make one, probably in these last few years would have been the prime. Like if they wanted to make one overseas and like a French, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Places where he's really revered, and then just distribute it out on, DVD or have limited, showings in the United States.
Like I was saying though, I think the best way to go would be a miniseries. With Breaking Bad and Walking Dead, all these miniseries that have really caught on, that people almost enjoy more than movies now. If they did a good Chaplin biopic miniseries, I think that would have the potential to be on the same level as this film, or even maybe better.
Yeah.
It says too that this movie was filmed in California, the UK, Switzerland, Universal Studios, Disney Studios, and Shepperton Studios. So it was all over the place.
Yeah, so, and apparently the filming was done in 5 months. I mean, I'm thinking along the Charlie Chaplin way of like 3-4 years for a film.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Especially with all the era changes. To do that in 5 months is just unbelievable.
Right. So, a major undertaking, and,
Overall, honestly, with everything said and done, and knowing what went into the film and the cuts that were made, I would still give this film, I'd give it a B+.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I'd give it an A. Not like A++, but an A.
I mean, I think he got it spot on with the beginning of it and showing you that this is where this man came from.
Yeah.
And for him to achieve what he did, in such a relatively short amount of time is just unbelievable.
Becoming the first world famous movie star, pretty much.
Right.
On a scale that, you know, that now we take for granted, but back then it was just unheard of to have this person so world renowned, so merchandised, so you know, the pop culture today as we know it, as far as movies and music go, kind of started with Chaplin.
Yeah.
And you said something about fate, as far as if Max Sennett would have known that Charlie was younger. But if you look at his life, a lot of it was just luck. Like you know, his father got him into the 8 Lancashire Lads. His brother Sidney got him into Carno. You know, Carno sent him to America. Max Sennett happened to see him. You know, it's just amazing, because he possibly, had it not been for his father, he might not have gone into, you know, the music. I mean, you know, the entertainment field. So it's just amazing how just different things happen and your life just goes in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine a world without Charlie Chaplin. I just, you try to imagine how innovative that he was and how he inspired so many people, other filmmakers. It just, and you know, had he gone to war during World War I, he would have been a footnote.
Yeah.
Nobody would, you know, so.
Well, we are not done with talking about the Attenborough film, and I won't spoil anything, but we have something special coming up soon. If there's anything you think we missed or any feelings towards the film that you have, just post them on our page. Yeah, post the comments, because there's a lot to say about this movie, and I'm sure as soon as we hang up here, there's going to be stuff that we forgot. But hey, you know, Eric Campbell never got mentioned in the film either.
Nope.
Yeah, the S&A Mutual period is just completely glossed over. I mean, if Edna hardly gets a nod, you know, all those other people that he worked.
Yeah,
like
that's
I said,
where they got it so wrong. I mean, that they really got wrong. But
and the fact that they, like I said, it drives me nuts that they rebuilt the set for the Gold Rush, and then you see maybe 4 seconds of it, and that's it.
We can talk about it more in the next episode.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you for listening.
Bye. That's the show. If you'd like to add a comment or drop us a line, visit us on Facebook at The Modern Times Podcast. This will keep you updated with all the current episodes, as well as lots and lots of Chaplin discussion from fans from all over the world. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.